Welcome to Crime Desk Wednesday. Today we're doing an analysis looking closely at source material that really charts the stunning and frankly deeply disturbing professionalization of one of South Africa's most urgent criminal crises. We're talking about the massive surge in the kidnapping economy. And we really have to start with a scene, one that sort of defines the shift we're analyzing here. Imagine this. A commuter, maybe caught at a red light in Johannesburg, driving their BMW, maybe their child's in the back. Then, just like that, in seconds, two vehicles block them. The doors forced open, they're dragged out, leaving the child, screaming roadside. Now that scenario is, yes, absolutely terrifying. But the key point here is that it's not just some isolated, desperate act anymore. It's become the precise, calculated, almost efficient operational blueprint for modern organized crime in South Africa. So our mission today is to really dissect the source documents we have to understand how kidnapping just vaulted from being, almost a statistical footnote, often linked to maybe rare domestic situations or opportunistic grabs, to becoming a core, almost industrialized business line in the criminal underworld.
And before we dive into the how it happened, we just have to grapple with the sheer unprecedented scale of this crisis. Because the numbers themselves, they immediately establish the severity. If you look back just a decade, the 2014-15 reporting year, SAPS, the South African Police Service, recorded 4,692 kidnapping incidents nationwide. Now, that's a terrible number, no doubt about it, but perhaps manageable in scope. Okay, now fast forward to the 2023-24 reporting period. That figure has just exploded. We're talking 17,061 cases. That's a staggering 264% increase in just 10 years. And what that translates to in real terms is just horrifying. In 2023, South Africa was averaging somewhere between 47 and 50 abductions every single day.
47 to 50 a day. It's hard to even process. And when you put that number, 17,061, on the table, it forces you to look, beyond South Africa's borders, right? How does that compare internationally? So with countries we often associate with this kind of crime.
Yeah, it puts South Africa in a really extreme, almost globally unique category. Consider Mexico, for instance. Mexico is globally recognized for high kidnapping rates, right? Yet, reports suggest roughly 2,000 cases annually. Or Nigeria. Despite heavy media coverage, especially around mass abductions, they report somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 annually. South Africa's rate, at over 17,000, it's nearly 9 times higher than those figures. It just underscores that the severity isn't just a domestic issue. It's a crisis really driven by some unique domestic conditions that are allowing this specific criminal enterprise to flourish at such a scale.
So the message from the numbers is pretty definitive then. This isn't random violence, it's strategic. Kidnapping has moved from being maybe a crime of opportunity to a calculated business decision for these organized syndicates. And that shift, that's what we really need to get into next. Let's unpack this.
Okay, let's delve into the strategic change. The source material really lays out that historically, kidnapping was, either an interpersonal thing, a dispute, or maybe a very risky, high-stakes gamble against the super wealthy. So why? Why did the whole criminal infrastructure suddenly pivot towards this model?
It boils down to the basic calculus of crime, really. Risk-adjusted return. The criminal underworld, especially organized syndicates, they operate pragmatically. They're constantly looking for the most efficient, least hazardous path to the biggest profit. Wal Bartman, he's the CEO of Fidelity Services Group. He captured this shift perfectly in the sources. He basically said kidnapping is the fastest growing crime because it's, and I quote, efficient, lucrative, and increasingly professionalized. And to really understand that efficiency claim, you have to look at the comparison point. What were the high-profile crimes dominating the last decade or so, particularly cash and transit heists? CIT heists. Think about what a CIT heist demands. Huge investment, heavy automatic weapons, extreme coordination, detailed intel. And crucially, they almost always involve a multi-minute, high-risk confrontation with armed security guards. The risk profile is immediate and incredibly high. You're risking a fatal engagement, basically, with every single operation.
Right. And presumably, the syndicates found that was just becoming unsustainable as security forces adapted and invested more in countermeasures.
Precisely. As the risk of, death or long-term imprisonment went up significantly for CIT heists, the expected return probably started to plateau or even drop. Kidnapping, especially the high-volume express kidnapping model, it just flips that equation completely. It requires comparatively minimal infrastructure. Think about it. A vehicle, maybe low-profile firearms just for intimidation, not a firefight. Maybe a safe house, but only for a few hours in many cases. And a small but highly coordinated team. The key difference is it substitutes confrontation with coercion. Instead of a shootout, the syndicate relies on psychological terror and the victim's immediate, overwhelming desire to just get back home safely. This gives them operational flexibility, allows for rapid victim transfer, and the returns, especially with digital banking, are almost instant. So yeah, when policing efforts hardened around things like vehicle thefts and CIT, kidnapping became the clear path of least resistance. It offered a much better risk-adjusted return, even if the take from one express kidnapping is obviously smaller than a massive CIT job.
The statistics you mentioned earlier, those milestones, they really bring this transition into sharp focus, don't they? This wasn't just a gradual increase. It sounds like it was a series of jumps reflecting successful criminal innovation. Can we break down those specific numbers again from the sources?
Yeah, we can track the adoption of this new business model pretty clearly in the figures. In 2011-12, we were at 2,839 cases. That's kind of the baseline, the old normal, if you like. By 2018-19, it had almost doubled, 5,455 cases. That suggests the express model was already gaining traction, proving itself profitable. But the real explosion, the major inflection point, happened after that. By 2020-23, we saw that massive surge to 13,790 cases, almost triple the 2018 figure. And then the latest figures for 2023-24 hitting 17,061 cases. That jump, particularly between 2018 and 2023, it's just off the charts. It really indicates that criminal innovations had been standardized, scaled up, and replicated across multiple syndicates.
And our source analysis suggests those spikes, they reflect more than just criminal efficiency, right? They seem to connect to broader socioeconomic instability, too.
Oh, absolutely. The acceleration, especially post-2020, strongly suggests a widening pool of, willing labor, fueled by economic desperation, post-pandemic disruption, rising unemployment. These factors likely provided syndicates with a readily available, cheap, and highly motivated workforce, people willing to execute these high-risk operations for quick cash. And of course, the success of the early adopters just meant rapid replication by rival groups. It feeds itself.
Okay, so let's look at the operational map then. Given this is organized strategic crime, where are the syndicates concentrating their efforts and why those areas?
The geography is really defined by three things: population density, concentration of wealth, and crucially, transit infrastructure. Gauteng is absolutely the epicenter. Consistently accounts for over 50% of all reported kidnappings. Johannesburg specifically seems to be the ideal hunting ground. Why? Well, it offers sprawling, interconnected highways like the N1, perfect transit routes for quick entry and exit. You've got a vast concentration of wealth in certain suburbs, providing the targets. And then you have dense townships nearby, which can provide anonymity for temporary safe houses and allow operatives to disperse quickly after the crime.
And the coast. KwaZulu-Natal also plays a significant role, based on the numbers.
Yes, KwaZulu-Natal accounts for roughly 20% of cases, concentrated heavily around Durban. This area seems to exploit the regional economy, the major port infrastructure there, and critically, the transport corridors like the N3 highway, which offer quick connections inland, but also importantly towards Mozambique. That cross-border element is key for logistics and sometimes for secure ransom collection points.
And we're seeing a clear trend of expansion along those main arterial routes, too.
Correct. Mpumalanga and Limpopo are emerging as hotspots precisely because they sit along these key transport corridors and cross-border trade routes. This isn't just incidental crime popping up randomly. It shows that syndicates are deliberately positioning themselves. They're exploiting high movement areas, often near border nodes, which facilitates swift escape and gives them that transnational capacity.
Okay, so the shift is strategic, the scale is absolutely massive, and the hotspots are clearly defined by opportunity and infrastructure. But that huge number, 17,000, it's clearly an umbrella term covering very different types of operations. We really need to dissect that operational spectrum now. What are the different kinds of kidnapping we're seeing?
Yeah, that's vital. It's crucial to understand that kidnapping, the South African context, it's not monolithic at all. It's really diversified into at least, three distinct operational types. Each one has a different victim profile, a different level of organization required, and a different sort of operational rhythm or cadence.
Okay, let's start with the dominant model then, the express kidnapping. The sources are suggesting this makes up something like 70% of reported incidents. So this is the model that's truly driving that huge 17,000 plus annual number. And this express model, it sounds like a masterpiece of, criminal efficiency, focused on the lightning strike.
Exactly. The victims are held for the absolute shortest possible time. Typically, we're talking 1 to 4 hours. That's it. The objective here isn't some protracted negotiation over millions. It's immediate, guaranteed cash extraction, usually through digital means now. They force victims to access their banking apps right there and then. Or they drive them to multiple ATMs to hit daily withdrawal limits. The whole process is designed to be swift, brutal in its efficiency, and it relies heavily on the victim's immediate panic and compliance.
Is there a case example that illustrates this?
Yeah, the sources mention a 32-year-old commuter forced off the N1 highway in Midrin. It's a textbook example. Intercepted by two vehicles working together. Driven around, not held in one place, but driven to 3 separate ATMs in different areas to maximize those withdrawal limits. And then just hours later, released. Financially drained, obviously traumatized, but physically intact enough not to require immediate, say, emergency hospitalization, which would draw more attention. For the syndicate, it maximizes turnover. They potentially do this multiple times a day, and it minimizes their exposure time. Low operational risk, high frequency. That's the model. Okay, so that's the high volume, quick turnaround model. Contrast that with the ransom kidnappings. These are the high value targets, presumably, much less frequent, you said under 5%, but the big earners. Exactly. These are the ones that make the headlines often. Far less frequent, yes, under 5% of the total incidents reported. Yeah. But they're the syndicate's biggest potential earners, and they demand an entirely different level of organization, just worlds apart from the express model.
Right. So this is where we get into the sophisticated, intelligence-led operations that can last weeks, even months. What makes the operational complexity so different here?
Pretty much everything. The modus operandi here, it demands potentially months of pre-operation surveillance. Deep intelligence gathering on the target, not just their routine, but critically their financial capability. Can they actually pay a large ransom? It often involves cross-border network logistics, multiple safe houses, not just one temporary spot, and intricate negotiation strategies, usually conducted through proxies, intermediaries, using encrypted channels to avoid detection. Victims are often rotated between these multiple safe houses to prevent tracking or any potential compromise if one location is discovered.
The sources mention a case, the Midrin private clinic owner back in 2022. That seems like a clear illustration of this complexity.
Absolutely. That operation really demonstrated a profound level of planning and execution. The owner was abducted from his secured residence, and crucially, the sources say this relied on intelligence provided by domestic staff. That insider element is key. We need to talk more about that. He was immediately moved from Midrin, likely to confuse initial search efforts, to a secure safe house over in Korholeni. And the negotiations weren't quick. They were protracted, involved several staged interactions, intermediaries. Ultimately, it culminated in the family paying, reportedly, millions in ransom over a period of 5 weeks. Now, sustaining that for 5 weeks requires intense, ongoing coordination. You need dedicated teams for surveillance, separate teams managing the safe houses, maybe even specialized teams just for handling the negotiations. Very structured.
So we have the express model, high volume, low complexity. Then the ransom model, low volume, very high complexity. But beyond those two main poles, the sources also note these sort of hybrid or collateral abductions. How are they functionally different again?
Right, so collateral kidnappings are where the victim themselves isn't the primary target, but they become a temporary operational tool. These typically occur during another related crime, like a truck hijacking or maybe a robbery targeting high-value goods in a warehouse. The driver, maybe passengers, like in that incident mentioned on the N3 near Durban, they're seized temporarily. Held for maybe 4 hours while the main crime happens, the cargo gets emptied, and the criminals secure their escape routes. So the kidnapping itself is really just a tactical measure. It's to neutralize potential witnesses and guarantee the security of the main operation. It's ancillary, not the primary goal.
And what about the domestic or interpersonal ones? Still a factor.
Yes, numerically smaller, but according to the sources, that segment remains persistent. These are often linked to custody disputes, maybe acts of revenge, things like that. Now, obviously, they lack the organized syndicate's financial motive, but interestingly, they often borrow operational techniques, targeted surveillance, detailed planning, swift execution. It shows how these methods become known. But overall, the sheer diversity of methods just proves that the criminal infrastructure here has the flexibility. They can deploy operations suited to almost any target and any financial goal, from quick cash to multi-million rand payouts.
Yeah, the fact that these operations can range from, a 2-hour terrifying ATM run to a 5-week multi-jurisdictional hostage situation, it really proves we're dealing with highly structured organizations, which means we need to go inside these syndicates now. How do they actually work?
Indeed. And the source material is really adamant on this point. These are not disorganized street gangs stumbling into kidnappings. We're talking about structured, sometimes even transnational criminal enterprises. They're operating under what you could almost call a corporate crime model.
They have defined hierarchies, distinct departments or roles, and logistical chains that often span across provinces and significantly across national borders.
Okay, let's try and define that corporate hierarchy. At the top, you've got the kingpins. Their main goal is insulation, staying distant from the actual risk, right?
That insulation is absolutely critical for their longevity, yes. At the very top, you have the kingpins, or maybe coordinators. Think of them as the strategic leaders. They're the ones identifying high-value targets, often through intelligence brokers. They allocate the resources needed, which can be substantial for ransom cases, and they manage the financial proceeds, laundering the money. Crucially, they are deliberately insulated from the physical crime scene. They operate through multiple layers of proxies and almost exclusively use encrypted communications.
Okay, so below the kingpins.
Below them, you typically find the operational managers. These are like your mid-level directors. Their job is to ensure the logistics run perfectly. They're securing the rotation of safe houses, organizing vehicle swaps, managing the communication protocols between the different field teams, making sure everyone knows their role. They also often handle the payment of the operatives down the chain. So if the kingpin is the CEO, maybe the operational manager is the COO, overseeing the day-to-day execution.
And then you have the people actually doing the kidnapping.
Then you have the field operatives, yes.
Yeah.
The frontline personnel. These are the individuals who physically execute the abduction, the transport, the immediate coercion, maybe collecting the cash in express cases. These individuals are often recruited for specific skills, evasive driving, counter-surveillance techniques. But the sources really emphasize this. The true difference maker, perhaps the most indispensable department in this whole structure, is the intelligence unit, the insiders and informants.
Right? The sources highlight just how crucial these insiders are. They're effectively the eyes and ears inside the victim's security perimeter.
They're the soft underbelly, exactly. These could be security guards, domestic staff, drivers, sometimes even disgruntled corporate employees. They provide the critical, actionable intelligence. Things like daily schedules, travel routes, the location of panic buttons, maybe the exact layout of a secured property, blind spots in CCTV. Without this kind of detailed intelligence, the really complex, high-value ransom operations would be significantly harder, maybe even impossible to pull off successfully. There was that example mentioned from Johannesburg in 2022, a syndicate apparently running 3 concurrent ransom plots across different suburbs, all coordinated via encrypted messaging. That just underscores the reliance on robust, real-time intelligence feeds, likely from multiple inside sources.
Wow. Okay, so that level of operation, it requires a constantly replenished labor pool, doesn't it? Given the risks involved, even for operatives, where are they sourcing the personnel for these roles, especially the skilled ones?
Well, the recruitment pool seems largely driven by the country's severe socioeconomic conditions, as we touched on earlier. Young men, often from townships, are frequently recruited. They bring valuable local knowledge, logistical expertise within those areas, and the motivation. It's primarily financial compensation, which can be staggering compared to what's available through formal employment. I mean, with general unemployment around 33% and youth unemployment hitting over 60% in some stats. A syndicate offering immediate high cash rewards, sometimes far surpassing a year's wages in the formal sector. Well, it becomes a powerful incentive.
And it's not just about muscle, right? It requires more than just foot soldiers. What about those specialized skills you mentioned?
Absolutely. They actively seek out specialized skill sets. The sources mention ex-security personnel, people who understand counter-surveillance, defensive driving, security protocols, potentially hackers, capable of doing technical reconnaissance, maybe accessing systems, and for the ransom cases, highly trained negotiators. These might be individuals recruited from fields where staying calm under pressure and strategic communication are really prized. And the training isn't always just informal shadowing. It can range up to structured drills, practicing surveillance techniques, vehicle maneuvers, even detailed contingency planning for what happens if they encounter law enforcement.
And their operational reach is key. We talked about the importance of those transit corridors like the N1, N3, N12, but that transnational capacity seems crucial for securing the really high-value ransom cases.
Oh, absolutely. The use of those cross-border nodes, the connections into Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Botswana, it's highly strategic. These neighboring areas can be used for temporary safe houses, putting the victim outside immediate SAPS jurisdiction. Or perhaps more commonly, they're used for secure ransom collection points, making the handover much harder to intercept. That case of the KwaZulu-Natal businessman in 2023 really illustrates this layered approach perfectly.
He was abducted, moved through 3 separate safe houses within SA, but the final cash pickup was coordinated across the border in Mozambique. An operation like that, the sources suggest, involved maybe 8 distinct operatives and relied heavily on encrypted communication, specifically tailored for international transmission, avoiding easy intercepts.
That ability to seamlessly shift, change routes, maybe change targets, it really seems key to their longevity, doesn't it? It suggests they have constant real-time intelligence monitoring their own operations and the environment.
Its adaptability is a core strategy. It has to be. They constantly innovate. If police patrols visibly increase along a certain highway stretch, the preferred route shifts immediately. They rotate personnel between roles, rotate safe houses frequently to minimize exposure if one operative gets caught or one location is compromised. They even pivot strategically. If, say, banks clamp down on ATM withdrawal limits, making express kidnappings less profitable per victim, they might shift more resources towards planning higher margin ransom cases. They function like adaptive learning organizations. They learn from successes, from failures, even from each other, ensuring sustained criminal success by constantly absorbing and responding to the operational realities on the ground.
These operations sound incredibly meticulous, and they clearly rely on more than just good logistics and manpower. They need a sophisticated, almost specialized arsenal of tools and tech. Okay, let's detail some of those operational accessories that seem essential for the success of these complex abductions. The logistics, especially for an express job, relies heavily on precise vehicular choreography, doesn't it?
Yeah, the source material describes an approach to vehicles that's almost militarized in its planning. It's rarely just one car involved in the actual abduction. You typically have a primary vehicle that's the one that does the initial block and grab maneuver. Then often a decoy vehicle. Its role might be to act as a visible distraction elsewhere, or maybe to cut off potential escape routes for the victim's car. And frequently an escape vehicle, often waiting nearby, maybe just around the corner, used for the rapid transfer of the victim away from the initial high-risk abduction scene. And these vehicles, they're routinely rotated, often rented under false identities, maybe using cloned or false number plates to frustrate immediate traceability through things like ANPR cameras.
And their weapon choices. You mentioned intimidation over confrontation earlier.
Right, and that extends to their weapons. Handguns seem to be the standard tool, primarily for intimidation, and this appears to be a very deliberate tactical choice. Why? To minimize ballistic risk. High-profile shootings attract maximum police attention, bring in specialized SAPS units, trigger intensive forensic investigations. That's unwanted heat. So intimidation is prioritized over lethal force because the ultimate goal here is financial gain, not murder, which complicates everything. Blunt objects, knives are also mentioned for coercion.
And the safe houses. These are the crucial nodes holding the operation together, especially for longer ransom cases.
Exactly. The safe houses are the hidden infrastructure. For express kidnappings, they might be very temporary, low security spots, maybe an anonymous flat rented short-term, even just a garage, used for only a few hours to process the victim and extract funds. But for the ransom cases, they need to be long-term, much more secure, often involving multiple locations. Frequent rotation between these safe houses is key to frustrate any tracking efforts by police or private security. And that growing use of cross-border locations again highlights the syndicate strategy. Complicate jurisdiction, make intervention by South African law enforcement much harder.
Okay, so that's the physical toolkit. But where things get really modern, really 21st century, is in the technology they employ. This seems to be the force multiplier that makes these operations so fast and often traceable only in retrospect.
Technology is absolutely indispensable for them now. Communication, for instance, relies almost entirely on burner phones, cheap, disposable phones, and increasingly on encrypted messaging apps, things like Signal or maybe WhatsApp using high security protocols. The goal is coordination while minimizing any digital footprint that could be traced back to them. Makes real-time interception incredibly difficult for investigators.
And beyond communication, they're using tech for intelligence gathering too, more than just watching someone.
Oh yes, far more sophisticated than just simple observation sometimes. The sources indicate syndicates use technology for deep reconnaissance. This can include things like placing small, concealed GPS tracking devices on a target's vehicle, maybe days or weeks before the actual abduction, just to map out patterns. They absolutely use social media reconnaissance, scraping profiles to understand routines, identify potential wealth indicators, look for check-ins that reveal locations, basically identify those predictable vulnerability windows.
And crucially, financial technology facilitates the actual extraction, especially in the express model.
Yeah, banking apps and instant electronic fund transfers, EFTs, have really revolutionized the express kidnapping model.
The victim is coerced, right there under immense threat, into accessing these apps on their own phone. They're forced to execute transfers in real time, often to multiple mule accounts. This immediate cash clearance, often hitting maximum daily transfer limits across several accounts if possible, minimizes the time the victim has to be physically held, which, again, dramatically cuts the syndicate's exposure and risk.
This level of precision targeting using tech like that, it tells us they definitely aren't just striking blindly. They're being highly selective, engaging in quite comprehensive victim profiling, it seems. Who are the ideal targets for these different models?
Yeah, they profile very carefully, looking primarily for two things: perceived financial potential and, just as importantly, accessibility or vulnerability. For the high-value ransom model, obvious targets include business owners, doctors, professionals, families known to live in highly affluent suburbs like Santon or parts of Midwend, people with confirmed or strongly indicated high net worth. For the high-volume express model, they tend to target individuals with predictable routines, commuters using the same highway route at the same time every day, people doing the daily school run, individuals running regular errands. These routines create reliable windows of opportunity. Remember that male commuter targeted on the N1, the sources imply he wasn't random. He was likely tracked for days before the operation to pinpoint the exact time and place for the intercept.
And this brings us back almost inevitably to that critical vulnerability provided by insiders.
It keeps coming up because it's so crucial, especially for accessing wealthier, more secure targets. The exploitation to domestic staff, security guards, maybe even corporate employees. These individuals can provide the critical, granular access details needed to bypass sophisticated security infrastructure, alarms, cameras, guard protocols. So this combination, this integration of careful profiling, advanced technology for surveillance and extraction, precise logistics, and insider intelligence, it really confirms that kidnapping in SA has become a fully intelligence-led criminal enterprise.
Okay, we've mapped out the crime, the criminals, the methods, the tools. But the core question remains: what's actually fueling this massive fire? And what is the true cost beyond the ransoms?
Well, if you connect this crisis to the biggest picture, the sources strongly suggest that the massive surge in kidnapping is fundamentally tied to South Africa's deep structural socioeconomic realities. The material repeatedly emphasizes the stark wealth disparity. It's often reflected using the Gini coefficient, which measures income inequality. South Africa stands at an extreme 0.63, consistently ranked as one of the highest, if not the highest, measurement of inequality globally. And what that number really means on the ground is you have these islands of immense, highly visible, concentrated wealth existing right alongside vast populations, struggling with chronic unemployment and deep poverty. This creates a perfect storm for the syndicates. It provides the high-value targets they need for profit, and it provides the cheap, readily available, and often desperate labor market they need to actually carry out the operations. High unemployment, especially youth unemployment, which statistics often put above 60%. It makes the offer of quick, substantial cash from a syndicate seem like a completely rational economic decision for some individuals recruited as operatives.
And this feeds directly into that devastating point you made about insider economics. We're essentially talking about ethical betrayal, but driven by sheer financial desperation in many cases.
Exactly. The sources point to the poverty experienced by many. For instance, domestic staff or low-level security personnel. It makes them uniquely susceptible to recruitment by syndicates. They might be offered a one-time payment for crucial information, maybe a work schedule, a property layout, a security system code, a payment that could far exceed their entire annual salary. It's a tragic dilemma, isn't it? Where economic reality forces a choice that directly compromises the safety of their employers or the security they're paid to uphold. So the vulnerability isn't just about having weak security hardware, it's this profound economic fault line that syndicates are ruthlessly exploiting for profit.
Okay, let's consider the other side. The operational challenges faced by law enforcement, SAPS, specialized units trying to combat this. The sheer speed of the crime must be their number one enemy.
Absolutely. The operational speed of that dominant express model, often concluding start to finish in under 3 hours, it leaves a minimal, sometimes practically impossible window for any effective, real-time law enforcement response. Beyond speed, SAPS is often constrained by limited resources, especially specialized investigative capacity needed for complex cases. There's the sheer geographical complexity of tracking suspects across vast, sprawling urban areas through dense townships where suspects can easily disappear. And And then, for the ransom cases, you have the immediate barrier of cross-border movements, which dramatically slows down intervention, requiring lengthy international liaison and cooperation.
Which really highlights the vital and maybe often unacknowledged role that the private sector plays in this fight, doesn't it?
It does. The private security companies, firms like Fidelity ADT mentioned in the sources, they often end up acting as the critical first responders, or at least parallel responders, and as intelligence aggregators. They can often deploy resources response vehicles, patrols much faster than official channels in certain areas. They provide rapid response, but also share immediate intelligence, like CCTV footage from their networks, vehicle tracking data from client cars, all of which supplements the often stretched public resources. The whole situation forces a blend of investigative techniques. Traditional forensics and crime scene analysis have to be combined with rapid digital forensics, real-time CCTV tracking, trying to piece together the syndicate's movements after the fact. It's a constant arms race.
And finally, we absolutely must acknowledge the psychological trauma. The cost of this crime extends so far beyond the millions sometimes paid in ransom. The hidden toll, the human cost on victims and their families must be just immense and incredibly long-lasting.
It truly is. The immediate experience for the victim involves acute stress, sheer terror, the pervasive fear for one's life. That's almost unimaginable. But the long-term effects, according to psychological experts cited in the sources, are devastating. Victims frequently suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, chronic anxiety, hypervigilance, constantly scanning their environment for threats, profound trust issues, making it hard to form relationships or even trust familiar environments. Social withdrawal is common. And for victims held long-term, like that clinic owner example, the source material details the need for extensive, long-term psychological and medical support. They often deal with psychosomatic symptoms, chronic pain, headaches, digestive issues brought on by the prolonged confinement and terror.
And the ripple effect on the family unit, it must be catastrophic in many cases.
Absolutely. There's the immense emotional stress on the family during the abduction and negotiation. The staggering financial burden if a large ransom is paid, which can ruin families financially for years. And the profound psychological impact on children, whether they witness the abduction or just cope with the terrifying absence of a parent and the subsequent trauma their parent exhibits. Recovery isn't just about getting the person back. It's not a return to normal. The sources emphasize the long, complex process, requiring sustained professional intervention therapy, support groups. And the gravity of that human cost really reinforces the desperate need for proactive prevention. Things like varying routines, improving situational awareness, community watch groups, professional security assessments where possible. Hashtag outro.
So, to bring our analysis here on Crime Desk Wednesday to a close, the overwhelming conclusion from the source material is that kidnapping in South Africa is no longer just a random violent street crime. It has truly morphed into a sophisticated, intelligence-led criminal industry. It's defined by that strategic shift away from older, arguably riskier offenses like CIT heists. It relies on professionalized syndicates operating with clear, corporate-like hierarchies. And it poses that dual, relentless threat: the high-volume, fast express operations targeting ordinary citizens versus the complex, high-value, multi-million rand ransom plots targeting the affluent.
Yeah, I think the current surge in kidnappings really defines this particular era of South African organized crime, the 2020s, much like maybe CIT heists defined the 2010s or carjacking the early 2000s. It reflects a chilling criminal adaptability that is expertly exploiting the country's unique, toxic combination of high wealth concentration, relatively porous borders, and deep, widespread mass unemployment. The syndicates fundamentally have maximized their profit by treating human beings, their victims, as disposable financial assets.
And we've established throughout this discussion that this entire enterprise seems fundamentally fueled by that massive socioeconomic inequality. It's the engine providing both the valuable targets and the desperate, disposable, willing labor pool, which really raises a crucial, perhaps uncomfortable question for you, the listener, to consider. If the very profitability of this horrific crime is so directly tied to a desperate labor market on one hand and stark wealth disparity on the other, can law enforcement alone, no matter how well resourced, ever truly solve a problem that seems fundamentally driven by a lack of basic economic opportunity for so many?
What if truly disrupting the kidnapping economy requires us to think beyond just policing and start addressing the underlying conditions of poverty and inequality first? It's a complex thought.
A very complex thought indeed. Thank you for joining us for this analysis of the source material today on Crime Desk Wednesday. We hope this gives you a more comprehensive understanding of mechanics, the drivers, and the profound human and economic cost of this devastating trend in South Africa.